Hello, my friend, and welcome to our very first interview of the Help Me Understand podcast series. Today, I'm so excited to have on with us a doctor of physical therapy, Kristin Williams. Kristin specializes in orthopedics, which means that she is an expert on your bones and your muscles and how all of that works together as a system. She also happens to be one of my favorite yoga teachers and teaches on the Lit Yoga platform, which you can find all of the links in the show notes below. What you'll take away from this episode are practical strategies on how to age well. You'll learn how movement impacts our aging process, both in positive and negative ways. You'll learn how to assess different aches and pains that you might be experiencing, learning when to push into something or push out of something, and also when to go seek help and what help to look for. I had an awesome time talking with Kristin, and besides all of those little tangible takeaways, I think there's something much bigger that we can learn from her, and that is an overall optimism about the human body and movement and the future. How many of us go through the aging process and gradually start to become more depressed about life and about our futures? We wake up one day not being able to do something that was pretty easy for us to do yesterday. We get a little bit sad about it. Maybe there's a little catastrophizing that goes on in our heads. And then the next day we wake up and it feels a little bit worse. And then this snowballs year after year. We've racked up a bunch of things that we can no longer do because they hurt too much. What you'll hear in Kristin is a really smart approach for getting curious about those things rather than worried about them. I know that getting worried is going to be our tendency. That's very natural, and you're not alone. Even I get worried when I start to feel something. It's like, ooh, did I mess it up forever? But you'll hear even Kristin say she also gets aches and pains. She just knows what to do about them so that tomorrow she's feeling better and not worse. I can't wait to share today's episode with you. So without further ado, let's get started. Welcome, Kristin. Thank you so much for carving out the time in your day to have this conversation with me.
You're welcome. I'm glad to be here.
I figured I would start this whole thing with how we know each other, because I feel like I have a very close relationship with you, and you basically have no idea who I am. So I've been practicing yoga with you online on the Lit daily yoga platform for probably 4 or 5 years now at this point. You're definitely one of my go-to teachers, and I really respect and love how you focus classes on certain body parts and different issues that people have going on. And to kind of give you a little bit of context around this, I found Lit Yoga 4 or 5 years ago when I was going through a really dark time in my body. I'd been practicing teaching yoga for 6 or 7 years. And during that time, I'd amassed a bunch of not super serious, but serious injuries to my right upper hamstring, to the tissue behind my right shoulder blade. My elbow would feel really weird when I would try to step forward from downward facing dog. Some of these injuries happened to me like literally in cat pose, like the most basic yoga pose of all, something I've done 1,000 times. But for whatever reason today, I round too much and I just get a shooting pain through my right shoulder blade that pretty much stayed with me nonstop for 3 years. And I love my yoga practice, obviously, but it was clear that I needed to make an adjustment with it if I wanted this to continue to be a part of my life. And I really had no idea where to start. And I thank God for the Instagram algorithm, because that is what delivered Lit Yoga and the founder of Lit Yoga, Laura Hyman, to me. And I think she got me into the platform. She did like a free challenge, like TSBT. I don't know if you remember this, the shit builds tenacity. And I was like, well, way to name a challenge, Laura. All right, you already hooked me. And then I did the challenge, and it was different than any yoga I'd ever done before in the best way possible. And I felt very strong. I felt like I'd just been coached through how to pay attention to what's going on inside my body in a way I wasn't getting coached in other yoga classes. And I could tell this was good for me. So I kept going. I found your classes on the platform, and you have really helped transform my practice, but also my injuries. And I'm happy to say that I feel almost injury free. I do get, sometimes things pop up and they usually indicate I'm overdoing something and I'm underdoing something else. And I listen to that. And you guys have given me really the tools to understand, what am I overdoing? What am I underdoing? What could I do differently here that would make this thing feel better? So I first want to thank you for that, to let you know you made a real impact on me. And then I want to ask you, what is it from your perspective that makes Lit Yoga such an effective form of movement?
That's such a great question. Let me just start by saying it brings me such joy to hear that, because honestly, what got me into yoga in the first place was I started seeing all of these patients in the clinic. I was working full time in Kentucky, and people were coming to me with hip injuries, hamstring injuries, wrist injuries. And I said, what are they doing in yoga? What is this? This was years ago, and yoga was just kind of becoming a fad. And so right before I moved to New Jersey, I took my first yoga class with a friend. He said, you're going to love this. Because I was a runner, I'm super athletic, and he knows I like to dance, I like to move. And he was right. I went to an Ashtanga class. I was like, wow, this is hard. I like it. But I moved right away to New Jersey and decided not to work full time when I moved there, because I didn't have to for the first time in my life. My husband got a job that allowed us for me to have more time at home with the kids. I have 3 children. So I started going to yoga classes, and right away, and more vinyasa style. And I was like, oh, this is why people are getting injured. I was looking around the room at people pushing themselves too far, end ranges of joint motion. I saw the draw of it because it's a workout. The kind of movement meditation side. So I ended up at this clinic, at the studio I was going to, I started offering free screens. I went to the owner and I said, I would love to offer free physical therapy screens to your clients, 15 minutes for people who get injured. And at the same time, I was getting back into orthopedic physical therapy. I lasted maybe 4 or 5 months at home. And I was like, nope, I need to get back into the clinic. I missed the interaction. I miss getting my hands on people. I'm a manual therapist. I'm known for my hands. So I was getting back into part-time. So I started seeing people at the studio. And one person came to me and said, hey, she had whatever injury. And she said, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but there's a studio around the corner that's owned by a physical therapist. I think you'd really like it. And it was Laura's home studio. So I went over, and the first thing I was struck by was how hard it was. And I mean, I was running marathons, a lot of running, and suddenly I'm getting my butt kicked in this yoga class. That struck me, and it appealed to me. But then the second thing was, I loved how she really, talked about minimizing range of motion, not going into end range of motion. There was a lot of focus on biomechanics, which I'm a biomechanics geek. It really spoke to me. So I was her student for roughly 2.5, 3 years before I decided to go through the teacher training. And what I was struck by with the teacher training was how heavy she focused on anatomy. I remember saying to the other people in my class, man, I'm so glad I'm a PT because I already know all this anatomy. All I was there learning was the blueprint and the adjustments and things like that. I didn't have to learn the anatomy. So, um, and at the same time, I was actually teaching the anatomy portion just prior to. I taught the anatomy portion at that same studio that I was going to.
Mm-hmm.
And I was disappointed by how there was no accountability to her students for coming to my classes. I never had
Hmm.
everybody show up. So it really highlighted to me how little emphasis yoga puts on anatomy, traditional yoga. And then I was impressed by how much Lara put on. So to kind of answer your question, what makes lit so different? It's this blueprint. And so the lit blueprint was created by Lara, who is she's more of what's called a neurodevelopmental physical therapist. And so
Hmm.
she had been working with stroke patients and brain injured patients for years and working them through something we call the neurodevelopmental process or the sequence. And she started seeing how much it helped them to get on all fours, to start on the floor, to work your way up, to stand. She's asked herself, why are we not doing the same thing for able-bodied people? Why are we
Hmm.
not building from the ground up? And so she created her whole method follows this blueprint of we start on the ground and what as the reset, and we
Mm-hmm.
warm up the body from the inside out. We warm up the entire core. We introduce posture. We introduce biomechanics. And then what most people love is it's truly choreographed. So every class that you come to has been planned out. I teach to our teach. So I've started now teaching the teachers. We train teachers all over the world. And my favorite thing are people just like you, Brenton, who come to the lit method because they were getting injured. They're feeling older in their body than they should. Then they find lit and they makes them feel 10 years younger, or they're moving better than they ever did. And then as teachers, they want to start teaching this method and help people in the way they were helped. So I love teaching teachers how to help people, how to sequence. I created these things called sequencing labs for the platform because there is a thought process to it. I would go to some yoga classes and it just feels like people start too early with something that's too deep. My husband
Mm-hmm.
actually tore his labrum of his hip at a non-lit yoga studio. They put us into a deep move way too early. And I
Hmm.
knew, wow, I shouldn't do this. So I didn't. But my husband was just doing what the teacher said. And he turns and looks at me and he says, I just heard something tear. And I was like, oh, crap. So now, X number of years later, he has 2 hip replacements. Focusing on the education is what coupled with this planned sequence that we go through, this warm up of the body, this laying down of what we call a brain map. So you know how it is. We give you sequences and then we do something called the stream where we put that all together. So what we're telling the brain is, oh, all right, we're going to do what we've done before, but we're going to tweak it. That increases our neural plasticity. Our brains are meant to grow and to change and to move. And when we do the same thing over and over and over again, we become less plastic. And that does not lead to growth. Growth in the body, growth in the brain comes from confusion. It comes from the little changes. So one of the things I think that scares people away from lit is that it isn't repetitive. You're going to get something new. You might get confused. You might get frustrated
Mm-hmm.
because we're not keeping it robotic. We're changing it up. That's my favorite thing about creating stuff is I have the freedom to make up something based on how I'm feeling. For example, my elbow's been bothering me. I had somebody write into the platform Kristin, my elbow's bothering me. And I was like, that's it. I need to make up a class on mechanics to take the strain off of the elbow. Because even I, as a physical therapist, as someone who is very aware of mechanics, I don't always practice the way I should. I go into old patterns. And so LIT is all about retraining better movement patterns and then continuing that process where we should never stop because we're going to fall into our easier habits. So yeah, so my class that I'm teaching tomorrow is I'm calling it the rule of thumb. And it's all about,
Nice.
getting weight into the thumb side of the hand to better engage the scapula, right? And to get pressure off. So that's my joy, is the education.
Wow. I'm so glad you brought up two things. One is the idea of the blueprint in LIT, because every class I take, I definitely feel the blueprint. I feel now is our time to accomplish this. Now it is our time to accomplish this. But then on the same side, you need that variety in there, as you're saying, so that the neuroplasticity can be more plastic. And so I love that LIT is, because, for it's interesting. My husband will sometimes practice LIT with me and he'll be like, why are you always beginning the same way? And I'm like, well, I'm so glad you asked, because you want to turn on your big postural muscles first. I get all geeky with him, right? But there's ways that you can look at LIT as like, hey, it is repetitive in some regard. That's the blueprint part of it. But then within that blueprint, it's designed to be flexible enough to really serve you over the course of your life, so that you're not just practicing the same sequence of yoga poses the way that you would in Ashtanga or another type of vinyasa or something like that.
Exactly. And, we're not out to say, hey, we're better than something else. We're just out to say we've evolved yoga a little bit. We've evolved it from it being perhaps less rooted in biomechanics to more rooted in biomechanics. Because to your point, you said at the very beginning, I think our society has put us in this position of we're all sitting in chairs all day. A lot of us are sitting at a computer all day. The human body was made to move and move in a variety of ways. And so I've seen this in family members where they're athletic, but they work at a desk all day and then they go get on a bike. Well, you're basically still sitting in a chair. Now you're just moving your legs. You're getting your heart and lungs exercise, but your back is not getting, your hips. So I like to think of LIT. I mean, it can be a one-stop shop, but it's also a yes and, so it's something that we can do in addition to whatever else we want to do.
All right, so let's get into it. What are we dealing with? You alluded to it. We're in chairs all day. We're at computers all day. What is it about the modern lifestyle that sets us up to need to do all of this movement supplement? Because I can imagine there was a time in which the demands of the day were such that you moved your body through a full range of motion, you loaded it in a variety of ways, and there was no such thing as extracurricular exercise because life was an adventure to get through, and it sort of conditioned your body day over day with the variety and all of this good movement, that we weren't breaking down the way that we seem to be breaking down today. So help me understand, from your point of view, what is it about the modern lifestyle that is really impacting this? And what are the things that you see most commonly? Like, what is the actual results from this modern lifestyle, the impact that it's having on our bodies?
That's a great question. And it's really twofold, because I see the impact of perhaps what you're talking about in the past, where we had more physical jobs. Because in Kentucky, I worked a lot with manual labor, a lot with people who worked in the car industry, in carpentry, which is a more traditional, let's say, early American lifestyle. And they were getting injured from overuse. So we have our overuse injuries, those still exist. But then we have this other
Mm-hmm.
spectrum of people who are underutilizing, but it becomes an overuse of position. So you
Mm.
sit with perfect posture, but if you sit with perfect posture for hours on end, you're going to get an overuse injury because the body is built to move. When you think of the circulation of our blood and our lymph, it's literally built. We've got muscle in the walls of our arteries to pump blood out. We don't have muscle to pump blood back. It's valvular.
Mm.
So we need the muscles to bring the blood back to the heart. If we're sitting all day, we have poor circulation. Our fascia is not moving. So we have fascia, which wraps around everything. So our lymphatic flow is impeded. And, the lymphatic system is what cleans us out, gets rid of the waste product. So by not moving, we're aging quicker. We are not staying as fluid. Our tissues, I see this classically with people, the Achilles tendon. It's the longest and strongest tendon in the body. It can withstand a healthy Achilles tendon up to 10 times the body weight. So think about that. It's one of my favorite facts.
Love
10
that.
times. But it is most commonly torn in men between the ages of 30 and 50. Now, why would that be? What happens to a man? And this is very gender stereotypical, but it does happen more in males because I do think in our traditional, at least Western culture, men are the working man. They go to work, they sit at a desk, but they got their buddies and they decide to play a game of pickup basketball on the weekend. Well, they've just been sitting for years on end, and this Achilles tendon is no longer moving. They aren't jumping, they aren't climbing, they aren't really putting that load through the tendon to keep it healthy. Our bones and our tissues need load to stay healthy. And so suddenly we're no longer loading them until we decide to go play a game of pickup basketball, and bang, this thing tears because it can no longer withstand the amount of load. When we jump, it can be 7 to 10 times the body weight going through our connective tissues, but they no longer
Mm.
withstand that. So we are feeling younger because we're doing less. And then, like I alluded to, sometimes we're doing less, but then we go to the gym and we go get on our elliptical, or we get on our bike, or we get on the road and we run, but it's all in the sagittal plane. We're never moving in
Mm.
other planes of motion. So we're not getting that full spectrum of dynamic movement that we really focus on giving you on the mat, that keeps your tissues younger. That's why people, like you even said, man, I am. I get the occasional aches and pains. And by the way, so do I. But for the most part, my body feels like it's 25 years old. And that doesn't make sense because I'm almost 50. But I feel better than I did in my 30s before I was moving in this way.
Mm. Thank you so much for categorizing this for me of the overuse and the underuse that then turns into overuse. So in the overuse case, it seems like this is repetitive motion that like the demands of our job is such that we only do these 5 movements and we do it for long periods of time. So what is the remedy for something like that? If you're going to have a job that is asking you to do such things, how do you create balance around it so that you're not running into overuse injury territory?
That's such a great question. And the answer is you certainly don't come off work and do the same thing. So if you're someone who sits all day, first of all, I
Yes.
recommend getting up and moving around. If you're someone who has an overhead, let's say a hairdresser,
Yes.
well, I wouldn't necessarily recommend a hairdresser then goes and does or something that's all more overhead activity. We we
Mm.
need to strengthen the postural muscles, the muscles that are helping to hold the joint centered within its range of motion. We need to, if we're here, if you can't see me, but if our arms are forward all day, then when we
Yeah.
get home, we need to get into positions where we're extended. We need to find excuses. And this is in the form of, as a physical therapist, I give you your homework to do. And that is to
Mm-hmm.
go, if you're flexed all day, you need to go home and get into extension. If you're squatting down all day, you need to get erect. So, if you have that type of, and some of it, you just can't help. I mean, there are some people who are built to do repetitive things. There are some people who will never get injured. They can work in a factory for years on end and never get injured. They're the exception rather than the rule. Most of
Mm-hmm.
us really need to combat whatever we're doing for prolonged periods in our off time with something else. And this is the problem. We don't prioritize ourselves anymore. We are prioritizing, what do we do when we get home? Well, I got to go pick up my kids, then I got to take him there, which then I'm going to sit in the car. And, we get this on our podcast all the time, how do we balance exercise? Where do we fit it in? And,
Mm.
it becomes a chore. So,
Yes.
by educating people, my hope is that person who is doing a repetitive job, whether it's a hairdresser, a dental assistant who's bent over, my hope for them is, instead of deciding that they're going to go home and do the work, that they stop every hour and do 10 repetitions. For example, when I'm raking the leaves or shoveling snow, that's not something I normally do. It's repetitive. I absolutely stop every arguably 5 or 10 minutes, and I do standing back bends. I will switch hands with the shovel because I'm
Mm.
preventing the overuse by way of just changing my movement patterns. So that's how we avoid overuse injuries, is by introducing movement in another way to give those muscles and those joints a break.
Mm. Such an interesting example of going out and raking the leaves and doing other things, because um, I don't think that's a natural inclination for most people. Most people are going out to just functionally move the leaves from one place to another, get them all bundled up. And it's sort of like, however that happens is fine. And I'm probably thinking about work or kids or something else during the time that I'm raking leaves. I understand, like, I can set an alarm on my phone. Let's say if I'm sitting at my computer has this effect. I do spend a lot of time doing work on the computer. It's kind of becomes like a vortex that pulls me into it. And so, how do you recommend people remember to do this kind of stuff? Is this literally in your mind, like, we need to start thinking about what my joints are doing and what my body is doing more often? Do we need to have more reminders on our phone? How can we make this feel like a more natural part of our life, where we're creating a variety of movement patterns all of the time and feeling very embodied in ourselves? And like, yeah, it feels good to be me. Because I can imagine, like, a person who goes around exploring all of the different ranges of motion has a visceral sense internally that it feels probably pretty good to be this person. And I know from my skin, like, sitting and getting sucked into the vortex of the computer doesn't really feel good to be inside the walls of my body. So help me kind of create some strategies here, change how I'm thinking about this, so that this can become more natural to be doing this sort of stuff throughout the day.
That's a great question. And first of all, I would give yourself grace, because it happens to me too. And I have all the knowledge in the world, and I've gone to years of school, but I will find myself like, oh, it's been 2 hours. Where did the time go? So you don't have to be perfect, but the beauty of movement, what I've found, is, you said it yourself. When you're sitting there, when you're sucked into the vortex, your body starts to tell you, suddenly you start feeling uncomfortable in your skin. And that's what movement does. When we start introducing, and that's where, for most people, it does need to be a choice to start, because I would argue most of us are relatively inclined to do less.
Yes,
Take the
100%.
path, the path of least resistance, right? That's what we're all going to take.
I
So,
love my couch. I love my
yeah,
couch.
I know. I do too. I do too. But I've gotten to the point over my years of just living and being, being active and being lucky enough to, I've always had an active job. So I've always been moving around,
Yeah.
that it doesn't feel good to me to sit for so long. And that's because I think my brain and my body are so in tuned that it's like, all right, Kristin, you have been sitting too long. Get up and move. And it might even just be go downstairs, walk around a little bit. But so in the early stages, though, I do think, use what we do have, which is alarms on our phones, which for me, before the phones came on, I trained for things. So I decided, I was in PT school feeling like a total slug, because all I was doing, I was working 3 jobs and going to PT. So I was literally like just existing. And I said, this is ridiculous. I've got to exercise. So I said, I'm going to train for a marathon. I got my husband, we're going to train for a marathon. But what that did, I gave myself a year, and it gave me something to write on a calendar. I'm going to do this many miles this day. That I had a goal, which is why, you hear about this couch to 5K.
Yes.
It's getting people into habit formation. On the LIT, we created this Build Your Capacity series, which is like starting slow, something different every day, starting at just 15 minutes. So people would get used to, and it builds up, because if you start gung ho, you're going to hurt yourself. You're going to feel like trash. So you're less likely to do it. So, like I said, number 1, be compassionate to yourself, give grace. But in the early stages, I do think you need to schedule it in. I used to get up before work. I get up at 4:15 in the morning sometimes to go, but it was my priority because I know I feel better after I move.
Yes.
Both here and in the body, in the brain and in the body.
Yes. So I'm thinking about the people of our time again, as I do. And are there trends that you see in your role as a physical therapist, like just issues that come up again and again that we should be that we should be cognizant of as we move through our lives?
Well, I think there are definitely most common injuries, if you will.
Yes.
And they are certainly, back pain is number 1. And I think I've had back pain. You've probably have had back pain. Because of the way we tend to move, most of us don't move well through our hips, and we move too much through our back. And so it's without fail, patients, and I used to work in a clinic. When I was in Kentucky, we were called Spine and Sports. So I worked with a ton of spine patients. And they were always surprised when they would come to me for their low back, and I was working on their hips. I was working on their upper back. I was having them address other areas. So, back is number 1. Neck nowadays, with the advent of the cell phone and the laptop, is probably coming close in second. And that is where I do think there's a huge debate on social media, even in literature, about posture. Does posture matter? There is no evidence that poor posture causes pain. I mean, there's no reliable evidence. However, I believe from years of experience, how we move and knowing where to stack, when to stack, meaning I'm simply thinking of my body as a car, right? You would no more drive around with one tire half full than you would, you know, drive around with a tire off, because you
Yeah.
know what that's doing to your car, right? You know that if you drive
Yeah.
around with one, that you're going to not only jack up that tire, the rim, but you're going to mess up the axle. You're going to mess up the brakes. You might mess up the alignment of the other
Mm-hmm.
tires. It's the same thing with the
Yes.
body. And that's how I like to think of posture. We don't have to walk around like robots, but when I'm bending over, if I bend by flexing at my hips, and if I come up by using the stronger muscles, our glutes and our hamstrings, two of our largest muscles in the body, we're going to protect our back in the long run, because the back muscles are just tiny little muscles that braid up. They aren't built to
Yes.
carry load. So we need to reframe how we're thinking about our bodies and stop looking at it so locally. You see it
Yes.
when you take your car to the mechanic. They're going to fill up the tire, but they're also going to look and see other places that might not be moving well. You have your checkup on your car every X number of miles. Why aren't we doing that for our body? So,
Yes.
you know, if we can, it's a shame that we don't learn more about this in our traditional education. Because
Oh, for sure.
if I knew, yeah, right, in my 20s, what I know now, um, I probably wouldn't have run as many marathons. I probably wouldn't have run when I was pregnant with my, the things that I kind of have done.
Mm.
I you know, I would have thought more about. I've got a long neck. I should really think about my pot. So I'm long limbed. I should move a little bit differently. So um, I would. That's my biggest message to people, is think of their body like they would a car, and
I love that.
balance. Balance. It's all about balance of forces. And that is where posture
Mm.
plays a role, because
Yes.
we can selectively balance what force is going through the back, what force is going through the neck. I mean, we're seeing people are developing spikes
Mm.
on the back of their skull from holding up the weight of the head, which is crazy. Like, literally, I
Wow.
mean, in adolescence, they're
Wow.
getting bone spurs on the back of the head, because we're here all the time. So what am I doing with
Fascinating.
my kids? I'm walking by them and pulling them upright, just to be like, hey, don't forget, you need to come back to this upright position. Give those structures a break.
I really love the analogy of the body to the car, because it makes me think about systems thinking, which I love looking at, even psychology like that, and the human body. It makes so much sense. And how I've often thought about my own injuries was that I overburdened something because something else was asleep on the job it should have been doing. And then I did that repetitively over time. And one day my body was like, don't do this to us anymore, please. Like, that's really how it felt. And so I tend to think about um, my whole body. Like, if I experience aches and pains, my first thing is like, okay, well, like, what around this structure is not doing the work it should, that this thing is now sort of protesting and saying, I don't like the job that you've assigned to me. Please assign me a different job. How close, like, how much does that match your perspective of what's going on in the system of the body and why things hurt?
Matches it 1,000. You couldn't have said it any better. And this is the beauty of my life experience in going from mainly working hands-on with my hands, really using my hands to listen to the body, because the body tells a big story in the soft tissues. So
Mm.
if you came to me and you're like, gosh, this shoulder's killing me, but then I got my hands on you and I might feel, wow, she's really tight in the back. I can feel that I can feel where the overwork is occurring. Going virtual, I have trained now my eyeballs and my brain to now I do everything virtually, almost exclusively. I still go in clinic time to time again, but to really watch. And I would argue 7 times out of 10, someone comes to me with plantar fasciitis, say, and I end up finding the issue in the hips. The hip is failing, and it could be the opposite hip. So making sure that you are going to see, because, I can figure that out in my own body sometimes, but it's even hard to self-diagnose. But going to someone who, that is what I do love about yoga in general, is we do everything on both sides. So you can really pay attention to how things feel, how you move, where you might be failing. I see it, my right elbow gets hurt, my right shoulder gets hurt because I'm weak on the left side. I overuse the right side. So I'm constantly like going, I'm tapping, I'm trying to get this side to kick on by cueing to take pressure off of the right side. So, going to a movement professional who can look at and say just exactly what you're feeling. You're saying, I keep injuring this because something else is lazy on the job. And unfortunately, our traditional medical model tends to be very narrow. You go to a hip doctor when your hip is bothering. You go to a spine doctor when your spine's bothering you. I had this story that's unbelievable. I had this patient come to me. This was back in Kentucky. Came to me with a diagnosis, lumbar radiculopathy. She'd been to multiple doctors, multiple PTs. I take one look at her and I'm like, your hip is, something's wrong with your hip. And I wrote, so she's like, really? And I'm like, yeah, she had no range of motion. I wrote a letter, sent it with her back to her doctor. I said, I really think she needs an MRI of her hip. Her doctor wrote back to me, she has been diagnosed with lumbar radiculopathy, evaluate and treat. And I said, I called up my friend who, my colleague, orthopedic surgeon. Can you see this client of mine? He says, absolutely. I send her, I bypassed the primary care doctor because he wasn't listening to me. He did an x-ray. Her hip was out of the sock. She was it was so degenerated. He goes, I've never seen anything like it. She'd been walking around with her hip not even in place. She had a hip replacement and was, I have chills, 100% better in a matter of weeks. That she'd been living with, quote unquote, lumbar radiculopathy because the doctor was so focused on, yes, she had a history of a disc bulge, but if he got his hands on her and simply moved her hip, he would have seen her hip could barely move. So of course her back hurt. Of course she was but that was not because of the back, it was because of her hip. So being able to look at the whole body and get out of our narrow focus, and that's as us feeling it in our own body. Know that pain is information. When you feel pain, that's your body's way of saying, excuse me, can we do something differently here? Can we move a little differently? Because like you said, I'm paying the price for this other side sleeping on the job. And so it does take, I think, and this is what years of experience, and I've always been a person that I was never afraid to be like, I'm not sure, let me go grab another therapist. And so I've pulled more experienced therapists into my room. I've learned a lot from other people. You got to drop the ego and really put yourself in the shoes of the patient and what's best for them.
How do we know when to seek help from a physical therapist?
Yeah, that's a great question. People who are on the platform, say they're people like you, who I know you do Lit Daily, people who I know are moving in a smart way. sometimes I'll just say, hey, try this. Somebody might write me. I'll give them a couple things. Try this. Honestly, 70% of the time that works, because I know that they're moving
Interesting.
well. Yeah. But if you try to change the way you're moving, if you I rarely recommend rest, but
Mm-hmm.
if taking away whatever is aggravating, I call it like scratching the scab. If you stop scratching the scab, if you change the way things you're moving and it doesn't get better, then I absolutely say go to a physical therapist. Now, not all PTs are created equal, unfortunately. So do
Mm-hmm.
your homework, find somebody who gets their hands on people, find someone who gets a good amount of time to look at you. If you go to a place and you only have a half hour, there's only so much a PT can do in a half hour.
Mm-hmm.
What I've found is people who pay for it out of pocket tend to get better quicker because
Interesting.
they
Yeah.
have skin in the game.
They're motivated.
People who
Yeah.
come to me and their insurance is paying for it, they're like, whatever, they don't show up, they cancel. But man, if they're paying out of pocket, they are, it's that's been a very shocking, revelation. But I would say if something doesn't get better on its own within a couple weeks of changing the way you're doing things, then you should go see a PT who can really give you a good movement evaluation and
Okay.
give you guidance.
Well, it's interesting because I'm thinking about, somebody I know who, like, the outside of their knee tends to hurt. It gets triggered during driving and then going upstairs, and then it kind of just hangs out for a while, but it's not really clear where this came from. It's just sort of like the lack of movement over time, and they used to be more active. They're still pretty active, but now even being active, like coming to a yoga practice or something, can trigger the knee. So and I get, like, pain is information, but I've also experienced it with some of my injuries that sometimes moving through the pain can be helpful in some situations in my own body. And then there's other times where it's like, please don't move through that pain. So it's like, in terms of people changing what they're doing, if you don't know what created the injury to begin with, you might be struggling for ideas of, like, well, what could I be doing differently? Are there any recommendations you have as far as that goes?
One thing I will say is I do talk to people about, I use a reference of a stoplight. So to your point, a lot of times moving through pain gets something better, right? So I talk about, you got green light, which is no pain. Yellow
Mm-hmm.
light is where you feel you feel it, but it's not red light. It's not like, take your breath away. Whenever I sleep on my neck
Yes.
wrong, whenever,
Yes.
I might tweak my back, picking my dog up funny, I absolutely move into the painful range of motion. And again, I am putting this out here. This is not for everybody, but I know my body very well. But I will look, you sleep on your neck wrong, suddenly you can only turn 45 degrees. I keep moving right into that yellow pain. I don't go to red because
Mm-hmm.
sometimes what happens is pain causes the body to spasm, which
Mm-hmm.
causes us to not move, which causes more pain. We get in this pain spasm pain cycle.
Yes.
So we have to break it. So by moving into the yellow light spectrum of discomfort, so let's say you bend over and you hurt your back,
Mm-hmm.
then you need to get up and go into extension and go into that yellow light discomfort. And, what we're doing is we're telling the brain, okay, we're safe. We can move here and we're not going to the red light. So we're safe. We're not, because red light's when you're causing
Mm-hmm.
damage to a structure. We're staying in the yellow light. And then the body starts to heal. Movement is what heals. We need to get blood flow to the area. That's the big heat, ice, the big debate. What should you do? They're really going away from ice now. I say do whatever feels better, because we need to decrease that pain by get down to the yellow light level, and then we can start moving. They call it MEAT now, movement, exercise, analgesia, which would be like Tylenol, and then treatment. So we want to move. But for everybody, you're going to get to a point where we need to go see a specialist. And that again is, for me, it's always been about if people aren't getting better in 2 to 3 weeks, then I say go see somebody. But yeah, moving into the yellow light is a good kind of rule of thumb
Interesting.
that has worked well.
Mm. In terms of going to see someone, I mean, you're an orthopedic physical therapist. You mentioned Laura works with stroke patients. I mean, how many different kinds of physical therapists are there, and how do you know which one to whose door to knock on?
For a musculoskeletal injury, I would go to an orthopedic.
Okay.
I usually recommend people to call and say, do you have manual therapists? Because the manually trained physical therapist is comfortable with their hands. And that usually means they're more comfortable getting in, because we might need some soft tissue work. We might need to loosen some things up. And they're usually just more accustomed to diagnosing biomechanics. So, Laura being a neuro trained, she also has worked a lot with, she takes her neuro knowledge and applies it to the body. She has a heavy biomechanics background. So she's kind of got a little bit of both going on. So my first recommendation would always be orthopedic over something else. But, if you've got if your loved one has had a stroke or then there's different types of PTs for that. But
Got it. If you're experiencing like nerve symptoms, like I injured a nerve in my left foot by wearing shoes that too tightly strapped me down on new Birkenstocks. There's like the ledge in new Birkenstocks, and it was not good. But with nerve stuff, is that also orthopedic or is that somebody else?
That's still orthopedic, yeah. So
Okay.
Orthopedic, like physical therapists, we have a better knowledge of the body. We when it comes to the musculoskeletal system, we really are second only to an orthopedic surgeon. And mind you, an orthopedic surgeon tends to get more narrow scoped. But the orthopedic physical therapist, especially if they're an OCS, we've gone through even more training to get that certification. That's your best. Yeah, that's like a board certification that's after degree.
Got it.
They're going to know about nerve injuries. They're going to know, you name it, carpal tunnel, knees, ankles, toes, hands. That's more of a carpal tunnel, absolutely PT, but some of the finger stuff, that might be more occupational therapist, certified hand specialist for that. But a lot of hand issues are coming from here. So I've had people come to me for elbow pain, and I fix something in their neck and their shoulder, and they're better in 24 hours. So it's, we really got to, again, look at the big picture.
How do you imagine in the future, like physical therapy, what direction would it go in, like in your perfect world? And you can answer this on the physical therapy side or on the yoga side of things, but like in your perfect world, how would these structures evolve to support like the long-term health and well-being of people better?
Best case scenario would be a prehab of sorts, where people are getting education, before they get injured. So
yes,
maybe one day insurance will cover prehabilitation services for people, because they would save the healthcare system a ton of money. Let's be honest, it's probably not going to happen. I do see a lot of physical therapists, myself included, going to a cash pay, we're because that allows us to spend a solid hour one-on-one with a client, really give them our all, and get compensated for it fairly. So you'll probably see a lot of that. It's already happening, which is unfortunate for people who can't afford that. But, I guess it all depends on people's perspective, changing the perspective from the get-go of putting emphasis on you, on your body. And that's going to be through education. That's what we're trying to do we're trying to do that in lit by educating people so they don't get injured, so they can treat themselves without having to see a PT. If you need to, then maybe the couple $100 you put out for that really good assessment is enough. I've seen it. I mean, I've seen people one time and they get better, so it's versus somebody then goes and sees another PT for 6 weeks, paying a copay 3 times a week. They've paid more money and they're no better. So it's, I would love to see pre being the first and foremost, but
I oftentimes will learn something in your or Laura's class and wonder to myself, why didn't I learn this in 7th grade gym? I really think that even as like a child, I should have emerged from high school with a much better understanding. I remember my very first yoga class. She was like, do something with your shoulder. And it was the first time in my life it dawned on me that I didn't really know what she meant by shoulder. Like, what is my shoulder? Is it this thing? Is it my arm?
Yeah.
I got like so confused. And then I was like, it just sent me into this whirlwind of, oh my gosh, I'm so ignorant of everything that's going on in here. And now I feel so lucky with lit, and just I put myself through some sort of like a little kind of boot camp of sorts where I was like, I just want to understand what every joint is capable of. So at least I have that understanding under my belt, so I can be like, this joint's avoiding that movement, or this, every time my joint does this movement, another joint moves with it. How interesting is that? Like, that really opened things up for me as someone who's not going to be going to medical school or get my PhD or my master's degree anytime soon.
Yeah. That's my goal. That is our goal. Like, my favorite thing is when people tell me, "Oh, Kristin, I was off at work and or whatever I was doing, and I was bent over to do something, and then I remembered what you said in class. And I thought, oh, I need to do," and it's like, yes, like that's how I know I'm winning. I'm winning in life when people don't need me, when they can act autonomously, because that's been I'm so glad I decided to become a PT, because I can treat myself. I want everybody to feel that way.
I love that. Are there any resources, books, podcasts, literally anything, YouTube videos, articles, the blog on the Lit Yoga website? What do you recommend we fill some time with to start getting educated on these things? What resources do you recommend?
Yes, that's a great question. Laura and I do a Wednesday Q&A on our podcast. Our podcast is called Redefining Movement, where people send in questions. So you can go to our Instagram. I'm KB Williams 99. She's Laura.Hyman. And people can send in the questions. So you could write in, "Hey, Kristin, my shoulder's been bothering me," and then we'll answer that. And then people love it. People listen every week. It's a 30 minutes, so you go on a walk the dog and you listen to it. And people are calling in about everything. And it's a great way to just learn about the body, learn about what other people are going through, maybe about what you've gone through. And we tell you how to treat it, what we recommend. That's a great resource. We also do have YouTube videos, small videos on different injuries. Lit Method.
Lit Method, and that's LYT, not LIT. Yeah,
exactly.
Lit Method.
And then you can, there's Lit Method. At Lit Method is both our Instagram. Laura has an Instagram where she puts a ton of videos on there. My Instagram is a bit more just like my family, with stuff sprinkled in. But those are two great resources. If you do the 7-day free trial on the platform, my goodness, you can just type in shoulder, and we've got there's a Start Here series, which is got mobility and stability work for every joint. It's just a wealth of information. I use YouTube, even myself. So there's a lot of great PTs that put stuff out on YouTube. So people will often say, hey, I've got this. I'll go search and find a video on YouTube and send them somebody else's stuff. If so, YouTube is a great resource. Just make sure it's a PT, that you're not watching a personal trainer do it, because PTs, we've gone through a lot of training to get there. I have more faith in that than anything else. So those are the big ones, I would say.
Got it. And so if somebody wants to submit a question to you for the Wednesday podcast, can they just DM you and Laura on Instagram?
They can DM. We also, for non-social media people, you can just write our support. It's called support@lytyoga.com. A lot of people email them in. You can make it anonymous. You can say, I don't want my name. So we'll just, and it usually takes us about 6 weeks to get it through, because we record everything. We just recorded yesterday for, some podcasts 3 or 4 weeks from now. But yeah, people, it's been a fan favorite for many years now.
Amazing.
Because you get two perspectives.
Yeah, and you two are so great together too. When you answer a question, do you go back and tell the person that you answered it so they know which episode to go listen to, or do you just have to kind of involve it as part of your weekly routine?
We don't tend to do that. We arguably should, but a lot of times it's kind of a somebody DMs us, we take a screenshot, and we might not get there, so I will, and a lot of times, to be honest, we'll respond to you with an answer and then still put it on. So be like, I'm going to answer you now, but we'll also answer this on so we try not to leave you hanging for weeks on end.
Cool. I mean, I guess it just gives you a reason to have this be part of your new weekly routine, is listening to the Wednesday Q&A. How can people practice on the LYT platform? It's been so long since I signed up for it that I'm just there, and it's just part of my bookmarks, and I'm just going, and I know what class I'm picking, and I'm doing it. But how do you get involved if you have no idea what LYT yoga is?
That's a great question. You can go to either lytyoga.com or lytmethod.com. They both go to the same place, and you can start a free trial there. That's the easiest way.
Okay.
And we also have live classes, so you can join. I teach every week over Zoom. I have a stretch class on Saturdays that's wildly popular, where I educate you throughout about your body. It's Saturday mornings. That's $15. You can drop in.
Oh, I've never done the drop-ins. That sounds amazing.
Do a drop-in, yeah.
Okay, well, maybe I'll see you on one of these Saturdays. I've never done one of the lives. I just wait for them to come on the next day. I get nervous about the lives.
Yeah, well, and you can always turn your camera off. You don't need to have your camera on. I would say it's like 70% of people have their camera on, but not everybody.
Well, Kristin, is there anything else, like parting words, final thoughts, any additional plugs that you want to make, or just declarations to the world that you'd like to get out there?
I love that. Let me just say thank you for having me on. Education is power. So that's my passion. That's our passion. That's clearly your passion for having me on today. So
yeah,
the more we know about our bodies, the better served we can be in our lives, because we just want to feel more at home in our own body.
Thank you so much. I'm like simultaneously, my brain is kind of giving me white noise right now, and is also like brimming with ideas, which tends to happen when I have like a really awesome conversation. So I'm just so thankful for you being my first guest on the podcast, and I've learned so much from you in this short period of time, and I would love to do this again.
Absolutely.
Alrighty, my friends, that wraps us up with our episode with Kristin Williams. As a piece of homework from today's interview, want you to start paying attention to how much movement you do throughout the course of a day. Maybe for you, it's built in. Maybe you work as a nurse and you're on your feet all day, or you're a dental hygienist, and so you have a lot of upper body stuff that you do. How much movement are you doing all day? And what's the nature of that movement? Is it pretty repetitive in certain ways? Or do you get lots of variety of movement? And now think about all of the different ways that your body could move. It's okay if you don't fully understand the capabilities of all of your joints right now. You'll build that knowledge over time, just with what you know today, right now. How much more movement is your body capable of than what you're actually taking it through in the course of an average day? Now think to yourself, what could I be doing every single day to help move me more into the space where I'm using more of my body more of the time? Think about this both in the context of just day-to-day movements. Could I get up from a chair more often if I'm sitting down? If I'm standing up on my feet all day, is there little breaks that I can be taking and doing something else with my body during that time? These are very tangible ways of building it into your already programmed day-to-day life. And then the next thing to think about is, okay, if I were to segment exercise out as its own activity in the day, let's say before work or after work, whatever feels right to you, what form of exercise makes sense for me given the types of movements that I do all day long? How can I get more variety in that? That's your homework. Go think about it. Start watching yourself day by day. Write about it, talk to your friends about it, leave a review on this podcast episode with your thoughts. Because writing it out and saying it out loud activates different neural pathways than when you're simply just sitting and thinking about something. So go think about it, talk about it, write about it, tell me about it. This will put the little pieces in motion for you to start chipping away and slowly start to shift your behavior. It's one thing to think about things, it's another thing to shift your behavior. And that's really what we're going for. So until next time, my friend, thank you so much for tuning in. Check the show notes or the description, whatever platform you're listening to on this. I got all the links in there for how you can connect with Kristin, how you can listen to her podcast with Laura, my favorite yoga teachers. And until next time, get curious, keep moving well.